Good evening everyone, welcome to another episode of Spooky Tales. This is your host, The Spooks. Today we continue the story of Rose Hall, but brace yourselves, this is a two-parter. We go deep into the past long before Rose Hall existed. We begin this half of the tale with the history of the woman who built it. The Countess Anna Marie Countevale. A woman whose bloodline goes back to the Knights Templar humble beginnings that prosper into nobility, wealth, power, and much more. But all of that is a whole other tale. It's near the end of July in 1556, Henry Saunderton's the new guardian over the body and wardship of the 19-year-old Countess. By murdering his predecessor with the aid of his future ward. However, unlike the men who bought the warships of young women in the past, he has no control over it. He remembered the day he first met her. An extremely young beautiful woman with long dark hair. She wore a Tudor-style gown of blue silk. Her skin was quite pale and around her neck was a pearl necklace with a pendant of gold with 3 pear-shaped pearls dangling below it. Her hands were clasped together, fingers long and slender, a few adorned with rings. She had piercing dark eyes that made him tremble slightly when his own met her gaze. He had just made an oath and became one of the first members of the cult of the Rose. In exchange for prosperity and power, he also has the Countess's wardship but allow her freedom to do with it as she pleases as part of the deal he made and the vow to never misuse the privilege and power given to him, to guard the secret that the Countess isn't human, and to aid her in any way possible. For years he and his heirs were devoted. Every few decades, to avoid suspicion of her eternal youth, the Countess would take on a new alias but always maintain the Countevale name, and her wealth. And the Saunderton bloodline would aid her. Never revealing the secret, and secretly training their sons to be the new heir to the guardianship. The Countess eventually decided to leave England to begin one of her new aliases in France. By this time it was the 18th century and she had become popular at the court of Versailles. The ever-faithful Saunderton bloodline followed her there. Dressed in the beautiful styles of the French court with her hair arranged in elaborate ringlets, pearls, and ribbons, she was even more beautiful, becoming the target for many noblemen, and many others of position, power and titles. Many lovers came and many she spurned when she tired of them. But not one could tame or convince her to marry. Marriage was indeed something the Countess desired, but she never dared become attached. She knew the dangers if she took a risk and became a wife. He would age and die, she would remain ageless and eternal. By this time Lord Joseph Saunderton was her latest guardian and keeper of her wardship. He was an ambitious man, one who was as devoted as the past generations. He knew his position would remain secure, at least so he thought, until one night, a mysterious man came to the France court. He was known as the Count of Saint-Germain. He was a tall, striking man who wore the finest of clothes, with his hair styled as the noble would at the time or hidden beneath a powdered wig. Old nobles were afraid of him. Those who knew his story claimed they knew him in their youth. Years later, when meeting him again, they mistook him as the son of the Count, but he would correct them and confirm that he was the Count. He would spend hours telling stories that no living soul should know. Stories told in forms as if the Count himself had been there, which at times he would claim he was. One night at a ball, when the Countess appeared, the Count, curious at the commotion of male nobles, finally encountered her himself. She was unlike any of the ladies in the French court or women he had encountered in the past. There was a maturity that no woman of such youth had. At least not an ordinary woman. By this time Saunderton had hired a servant. Her name was Carlotta. She was a hideous woman with eyes people described as being the eyes of the devil. She knew of the Countess's secret. She herself was a witch, and she and the Countess never got along. She was suspicious of Carlotta and was uncomfortable whenever she was present because she would stare unblinking towards her. She could feel the hate and dislike from this woman and often wondered what Saunderton wanted with such a woman under his employment. Carlotta served as a spy and would secretly watch the Countess for Saunderton. Oftentimes she would rudely intrude into the Countess, purposely trying to ruin moments with courting short-time lovers, even attempting to tarnish the woman's reputation for reasons unknown. She was ordered to spy more often when something other than a normal short-term romance began between the Countess and the Count of Saint-Germain. The Count who took pleasure entertaining the nobles with his stories found himself enjoying the tales of the English court, stories from the 16th and 17th century, stories he himself heard and witnessed, but to hear it from the perspective of another was refreshing. At social events at the France court, the Countess received a new titre when courtiers gossiped. She was now known as the Rose of Count Saint-Germain. It was a month before the French Revolution when the Count warned the Countess that dark and dangerous times were coming, and after much begging and persuasion managed to convince the Countess to leave France just in time. Before the two departed, the Count gifted her a golden yellow rose. It was that moment the Countess made him a promise. "The next time you are in England I will wait for you at a new estate with a garden that only grows this rose. We shall be there eternally and forever." Saunderton's worst fear was realized when the Count presented a gold ring with an opaque stone. The Countess would be a bride, and Lord Saunderton feared losing his role as guardian. Carlotta, sensing a chance to ruin the happiness of the Countess, encouraged Saunderton's fear until at least a plan was made, something cruel. When the Countess returned, plans for Rose Hall were immediate. Saunderton and Carlotta both kept a watchful eye for any signs of the Count. When news came in a letter, he had Carlotta use her magic to enchant a pen to write in the Countess's hand a letter of her breaking her promise and no longer wishing his presence. The letter was venom. Later the Countess would learn the Count had been in England but never once paid her a visit nor wrote a letter. She learned from Saunderton he would be leaving by ship the following day. So she sent Davidson, her messenger, to try and get to the Count before his departure. But he would never make it. Carlotta had offered him a warm beverage to drink before he departed. His body was found with signs of poisoning on the ground of Rose Hall's construction. It was later in the evening Carlotta had been caught doing something to the gardens, causing everything growing to decay and wilt away. She was cursing and plaguing the soil of Rose Hall, and for what? She hated the Countess. Her reasons of hating her, there was no good reason. She hated her just to hate. She was jealous of her eternal beauty, jealous that she could not obtain what the Countess had been given. She even confessed she was responsible for Davidson's death when he was sent to try to reach the Count before he set sail from England. It was then the old woman began to mumble something. It was enchantment, but the Countess's faithful were quick. One man restrained the woman, while Jacob forced her jaw apart and Jacques dispatched her tongue with his sword, preventing the enchantment. A slimy black tongue fell to the ground. Carlotta's punishment was immediate. Her eyes were gouged out and she was burned alive. After Carlotta had been burned, her ashes were salvaged and were taken far from Rose Hall to be disposed of elsewhere. She didn't wish anything of that wicked woman to remain. But her loyal cultist Jacob presented her a silver box with the black tongue inside. The Countess had been curious as to why the tongue was not disposed of, but also as to why it was so dark. She asked Jacob if he knew. "My lady, the reason for Carlotta's tongue being so dark was because she was a practitioner of the devil's darkest rituals. I dare not repeat what such rituals were, but it is said the black tongue of the foulest witch is quite poisonous. If prepared a certain way it has the look, smell and sweetness of honey." The Countess, intrigued, requested that Jacob prepare the tongue to be made into the poisonous honey-like substance. It could become of great use in the future. Lady Saunderton had arrived unannounced to Rose Hall with her 2 sons. "Countess, I come begging your forgiveness and mercy for my husband. He has done something horrible, and as a woman I cannot hide what cruelty such a man could do." It was then the Countess was made aware that Saunderton had been responsible for why the Count never returned to her. He had discouraged and deceived him, claiming she no longer desired him. The woman continued, and all the Countess did everything she could to conceal her anger. All this time she thought the Count used her, tricked her for his own pleasure, then discarded her. And the man who she thought was the most faithful of all her cultists, whose bloodline had been keeper of her secret and wardship for a few centuries, now had betrayed her. When the woman had finished she had planned to leave, but before she could the Countess stopped her. "Please, Lady Saunderton, stay a while longer for tea. I am grateful for your confession, and opening my eyes. I assure you you've nothing to worry, your husband shall never know you exposed him." The Countess turned to her maid. "Prepare the tea and add some of that new honey that was delivered today. Please make sure that the cakes are extra glazed with it as well." The maid who knew what the Countess meant by the special honey followed her wishes. While waiting, the Countess carried on normal conversation with Sonderton's wife, learning how her husband was proud of his 2 sons, they were his legacy. The maid soon returned and the Countess sat and watched Lady Sonderton and her 2 sons enjoy the tea and cakes. The young woman's lips formed into a half-smirk. Later, upon receiving an invitation, Sonderton arrived at Rose Hall, still under construction, but most of the structure was ready to occupy. He figured the Countess was still grieved by the departure of the Count of Saint Germain, and suspected she desired the company of one who she believed was close and faithful. He felt guilty for what he had done, but he knew it was for the benefit of his family. She would never know, but he would make up for his betrayal by being supportive in recovering from the grief of her failed chance at marriage. Upon entering the dining room, he noticed the Countess was curiously happy. Her demeanor was different from the last time he saw her. She was dressed in a gown of silver and white silk. Her hair was arranged with care with long ringlets and curls, with silver hair ornaments. Fresh gold-yellow roses were pinned to her bodice, the same breed of rose the Count had presented to her. She greeted him and the 2 sat down for their evening meal. Fresh wine poured and soon fresh meat pies were presented to Sonderton. "Please enjoy your meal, a special dish I had arranged just for you." The man took his silver fork and broke into the pie and helped himself to a bite. The meat melted into his mouth, and everything from the gravy, seasoning, and crust was perfect. "Delicious," he said, "the meat is very tender, the spices are perfect. Where did you hear of this recipe?" It was then the man began to feel uneasy when the Countess's lips made that iconic half-smirk again. It was something Sonderton knew well and never meant anything good, at least for the person the smirk was made towards. This is the end of part 1. Stay tuned for part 2.